What if the person you just hired didn't actually quit their old job? What if the business you just acquired was worth millions less than you thought and you didn't find out till it was too late? I've seen both and worse. In today's episode of the Business Emergency Room, we're talking about due diligence, not just for M&A lawyers, people in mergers and acquisitions, but for every high-stakes decision in a fast-scaling business. Because adding new relationships to your business that are critical requires work to make sure that those are the relationships that are going to add to your success and not break it. I've got some example stories for you, ranging from almost harmless to catastrophic, and one that shows that doing some due diligence can actually transform a relationship for the better. I'm also giving you my 5-part toolkit to do due diligence better than you currently are and help you with your next big decision around partnerships. By the end of this episode, you should know exactly where to dig, how to dig, and look beyond the glossy pitch decks and the sales packages, and how to protect yourself from the kind of scars that I and many others have earned the hard way. So let's dive in. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. I'm so glad you're tuning in today. We don't talk easily about the messy stuff in business relationship that goes wrong. It's actually hard to find some of these stories, but we should talk about them because we can learn from it. At the same time, of course, confidentiality should be respected, and that makes it sometimes hard to find the examples. Well, we just need to dig a little deeper. And digging a little deeper is exactly what you need to do. Due diligence is key to successful business growth. When you engage in a new relationship, business or personal, you want to be sure that what you're getting into is what you think it is. Due diligence is somewhat like the medical checkup for every critical decision in a fast-scaling business. The world is spinning faster around its axis than ever, metaphorically, right? Window dressing at the same time is also easier than ever, and separating fact from fiction is harder and harder. So, doing due diligence was never easy. Most of us were not really good at it or doing enough of it, and it's only gotten harder. I'm not talking about physical products today because they're doing some form of due diligence is typically easier and more organized. You can do inspections, you can test physical products, you have systems for warranties and stuff. I'm talking about people, companies, partnerships, relationships, where everything is harder to evaluate, more subjective, and more prone to deception and bias. This truly is an issue because the shocking number is that 70 to 75% of all acquisitions fail. 3/4. That's a huge number. And I just told you that this is more than about acquisitions, but 60% of leaders who talk about the reasons their business failed say that insufficient due diligence led to their business going under. 60% contribution rate to failure. So, important topic. Well, let's start with some of those elusive examples that are sometimes hard to find. These are some out of my own history books. I'm going to cover some extreme ends of the spectrum. So let's start with one that actually was associated with my first ever job. I started working for a small company, a small gas company in the Netherlands. So they were operating what was called Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, that corner of Europe, supplying customers with nitrogen and oxygen and other gases. They were already operating 100% in the umbrella of a multinational based out of Germany, but still under their own name and somewhat independent in that region. The big multinational, the mother company, had just acquired their peer when I came on board. So this is the merger between Linde and AGA. And both were quite similar companies. And so this was a merger for scale. And to effectively stop competing with each other in certain markets, and benefit from the economies of that. Of course, in the European Union, even back then, the regulations around some of this and around the competition or the lack of competition are insane. So there was a lot of oversight on this merger, although it was a global merger, and the oversight didn't just happen in Europe. Right? Many countries have rules around this that you need to comply with. So this merger was definitely of a scale that it was scrutinized in many, many places and had to adhere to all sorts of reviews. And so at a top level, due diligence happened, not just internally, but also externally. I would say, though, that didn't really carry down to the granular level. And so the AGA business in the Netherlands merged with our business in the Netherlands. And once the merger was finally completed, it was kind of like, okay, this is the business we had before the merger, and here's the business we bought. So we're just assuming that the turnover of those two, we put them together, and there should be some synergies and some improvements from it being one. So let's assume that 1 + 1 will be a little more than 2. Here are your targets. And of course, it doesn't work that way, right? Of course, what we bought was probably not as rose-colored as projected. So what we bought was the most positive version of what the story could be and not what it really turned out in reality. And when you put these things together on day one, none of that gels together. And you find some weird intricacies, you find people disconnects, you find, some small skeletons in the closets. Nothing earth-shattering, but enough to be somewhat disjointed for years in terms of lack of reality check on what we thought we bought and what we had bought and how things worked. It wasn't all that smooth. Then, on a more extreme end of the spectrum, not in the merger acquisition space, I was working on a project in Eastern Russia, which was transitioning from the project being built to an operational organization. And as there should be, there were major nationalization targets. So the Russian government had stipulated that an X amount of the people working in operations had to be Russian nationals, which is a good objective. But the challenge we had was that the location was on a Russian island off the East Coast where most Russians didn't want to live or work. There was some stigma around the location as a former prison colony. It's far out from anywhere. There wasn't a lot of luxuries or nice to haves there compared to maybe a place like Moscow. On top of that, we were operating the first ever offshore oil and gas field in Russia. So to find Russian nationals who have offshore oil and gas experience, who are not already in great jobs elsewhere in the world and want to come back to Russia, but then not back to where they're from, but to some strange island off the East Coast, not simple at all. So we struggled hugely not a good word, but you know what I mean. We struggled big time to resource for these positions. And suddenly there was this announcement that we'd found this amazing logistics manager. Best person ever, great fit. We were so lucky that we found a person like this. Well, within weeks, there was major conflict around this person, and he left again. Within 3 weeks, actually, with this humongous sign-on bonus. And so when somebody finally started to make some calls after the fallout from this and called his former employer, they actually said, "How do you mean, former employer? He still works here. He just came back from a month's leave." We'd totally been played. See, this is an extreme example. The due diligence failure is not rare at all, right? And there are some very public, high-scale examples out there, like, for instance, Enron or FTX, where billions were involved and many people lost assets. But it happens day in, day out on a much smaller scale. I think we all can come up with examples where we didn't do our own due diligence when we personally made purchasing decisions, or when we started, when we brought in a contractor to do work on our house or do a repair job, and everything ended up 3 times the price. You know what I mean? So this is not a niche. It's universal. And the whole point of it all is that the biggest thing I want you to take away about due diligence is that I want you to do it. Do more of it. Dig a little deeper. How can you do things differently and better to make sure that you are not part of those big failure rates that I quoted at the beginning of the episodes? Let's start with point number one. When you do due diligence or when you engage in a new relationship, business relationship, I want you to define the critical success factors. I want you to define what is the bare minimum that needs to hold true or that needs to come out of this relationship for it to work. Whether it's the minimum skills or the fit or the interpersonal abilities of a hire, whether it's the financial health or the supply stability or the business continuity plan of your supplier, or whether it's the client retention percentage or the asset value to you in an acquisition, not to them, right? So a re-evaluation of the assets based on how your legal structure and tax structure and price basis is. I need you to figure out what is the bare minimum that needs to be true. I need to test X, Y, or Z in my due diligence because if it doesn't meet these minimum criteria, I should not enter into this relationship and make a different decision. Why I want you to try and define this is because I want you to focus your efforts. I think in due diligence, we need to all go further and dig deeper than we typically do. I think also the reason we don't is because we cast the net too wide or don't know where to start and just do a whole bunch of stuff or do the easy, accessible stuff. And at some point say, well, this has to be enough. I want more purpose behind it. And the purpose comes from knowing what you need for this relationship to be successful or to know that this is the right partner to engage with. Then the second step is that I want you to admit to yourself that you don't know what you don't know, right? And so I want you to use AI. I want you to use AI because the systems can dig faster and quicker than you ever could. So let loose on the system, put in a variety of prompts and dig out what you can. Dig out what you can about previous relationship, previous performance, about mentions in the news, about benchmarks that they were part of. Put the queries in. It can keep going, right? You do need to actually go through what it comes up with and look for the stuff that's not commensurate with what you've been told or what they've been telling you. Gaps in that. Is there pieces and things that the system can't find anything about? I started with saying people tend to hide these stories, right? People tend to hide what isn't working. And so the fact that you can't find much about something could be a red flag. Look for the stuff that sounds weird or funny to you, because those are the places where you might need to do a little deeper digging. Yeah. So again, it's a good way to help you focus where to go after and where to maybe find some potential smoke. But then you still need to sort facts from fiction, and that's where the people come in. Then, as the third point, what I want you to do is look for the dirty laundry. And I'm telling you that AI is not going to help you with that because, as I said, we don't really air that. And people don't really put that on paper. So unless there's a very public scandal, which you will probably already know about because in this day and age, that's very hard to hide. If they manage to hide it so far, they should be able to continue to hide it. So the dirty laundry isn't coming out from you issuing a bunch of prompts. Where you do find it is with past employees, ex-partners, ex-suppliers, people they broke up with, people that left them. In my experience, these people are willing to talk. They're not willing to talk publicly. They might not be willing to go on the record. They might not even be willing to be extremely explicit. What they typically are always willing to do is listen to your side of the story and say, I'm considering entering a relationship with this company to achieve X, Y, or Z, right? What are your critical success factors as per point one? And I found some vague indications that something may be amiss around X, Y, or Z, which has me worried. What do you think? And people will tell you and say, okay, yes, there's maybe a story there. I don't want to talk about it, but it has no bearing on what you want to do with them. And I think you should be fine. Or, yeah, I would have another look at it. Or I agree that you should have some reservations in this space. Even if you get that, that will inform your decision making. And maybe you get a little more, but you need to do a little digging for that dirty laundry because it is there. And at least speak to people who did leave previous relationships. And if the dirty laundry is of the nature of like, yeah, actually they're fine, it's just not for me, then that's also good to know, right? All right. Then we get to elimination of decision-making biases. 4. That's a big deal because we have some 170 biases or something that come into decision-making. And they skew towards the positive, particularly when we are acquiring, when we are buying, and new relationships are buying. When we're buying or engaging, we overestimate. We, at some point, want to make a decision. We have a little bit shiny object syndrome. And then once our mind is already there, we start justifying towards ourselves that we've made the right decision, and we go in a completely further cycle on that. So a bit like when you buy a new car when you shouldn't really yet, right? Your old car is actually still fine, but you really wanted it. And as soon as you do that, and then somebody says, oh, nice new car, you kind of go like, yeah, but it was such a great deal, so I had to do it now. That's you justifying to yourself that was the right decision. And you do that in business or in any kind of acquisition decisions. And so there is lots of biases there that create noise and prevent you from maybe making the right decisions and digging deep enough. So with those searches that you put through AI, I need you to have multiple reviewers. I need you to have multiple perspectives. So I need at least 2 very different types of people to read through some of that information and figure out what to them stands out, looks weird, looks funny, looks funky, or looks really good, right? If you're reviewing data that you've obtained from your relationship or your partner, you can also have AI review it and say, okay, can you find other sources that suggest this? Read it as if you're this person, read it as if you're that person. It can help you have a look at some of that and get you some inspiration from how differently to look at what's been presented to you. And maybe catch some blind spots. You also need to prevent groupthink, and you need to make sure that you keep that process fit for purpose. So if this relationship is critical, it's a big, major deal, and it's not something you do all the time, like hiring or firing of people maybe, bring in external help. Bring in someone who does this kind of reviews all the time, who already has a toolkit, who can set you up with something that's fit for purpose, and start you off on with the right prompts and the right questions straight away, who also knows how to quickly engage and find previous relationships, etc. So you can do this faster, because what we see all the time is that people feel after a while that if they simply spend enough or long enough on a due diligence exercise, it should be enough. But more time doesn't mean you did better work, right? So, and in this fast-paced world, time's of the essence. So if you want it done well in the time you have, bring in somebody who's doing this all the time, who can help you take those biases out of the system. If we'd actually engaged with the right kind of parties to hire on our Russian project, I don't know, it feels like a beginner error, right? To pay a retention or to pay a bonus for somebody to come on without any commitment to stay a minimum amount of time. So that leads me to point 5, because yes, even if you do your due diligence amazingly well, there is a potential that this relationship doesn't work. And so what I want you to do as part of the process around the due diligence and the start of the new relationship, I want you to create outs. I want you to have a prenup. I want you to think about with the other party, if those critical success factors are not met, what does that mean to my business? How does that impact me? What are the damages? And how will we notice that? What will be the symptoms or the signals? And what are then our means to dissolve the relationship? If you are working with the right partner who doesn't have anything significant to hide, and who's also in the course of you working with them has come to believe that they're the right partner for you, between you two, this should be a relatively easy discussion because both parties believe that this is the right relationship. And so it's actually a good stress test to see if there's more there that you're unaware of. Because if you are bringing this up and saying, well, I think this starts to look good, but if we, before we sign this contract, I want to talk about what do we do if this is what it seems and it doesn't work for either of us, and the other party gets really defensive and hesitant, then there might be more there. You need to bring this up. You need to talk about the scenario that it doesn't work, because you cannot go after it all. And there may be stuff that you don't find. Hopefully it's small stuff, like the example of the merger that I talked about in the Netherlands, stuff that you can make work or is at a make it work level, right? But if it's the big stuff, you need to be able to get out and you need to be able to recover some. So those are the 5 points that I want you to think about in terms of due diligence. I want to finish with a short story where due diligence actually really saved and turned around a relationship. This is about an oil and gas joint venture operating in California. It was owned by 2 oil and gas majors, 50-50. They've been spun off into a separate business to be hyper effective in that environment, operating a fixed set of fields. So it was very operations focused, not growth, just maximize what's coming out of these fields and using Lean and Six Sigma methodologies. So methodologies and ways of operating that were not normal or possible in the larger organizations of these 2 majors. They've been operating for years, very high retention rate of people. So the same people, very effective, won every award. Performance was great. Success for decades. But these fields, were running for a long time. And at some point, when people work on these fields and see that there's decline there, they also saw opportunities for growth. And so there was year after year that they started in the annual budgets to put proposals forward to grow, to do new projects, to develop, to have a future. And every year, the partner said, nah. And it created tension in the system and it created frustration. And so finally somebody turned around and somewhere between either side, the decision was made that the oil majors would actually do some due diligence on those opportunities to say, okay, you've now told us 700 times. Let's actually look at these, which was, I think, one of the best decisions ever. Also because I got to be part of that and I love that kind of work. But the due diligence was done. There was 4 opportunities. They were split between the majors to be worked, and 2 of them were killed outright. And you might say, "Oh, that's negative." No, that's actually good, because we've all have these projects in the workplace that are being worked or that keep coming up in the proposals, but shouldn't go anywhere. Well, then they should be killed because it's a recycle and there's hope and effort attached because somebody will keep working them, because otherwise they wouldn't be reappearing on all the plans. So they got finally killed and did not make it back on any annual project discussions. 2 others did get work. One actually got executed in a slightly different form. One of them had a long trajectory and ultimately didn't make it, but ran for another few years and actually got some serious effort and work on it, and was a good opportunity that needed work. The way the oil majors assessed and saw these projects and the value of it and the size of the opportunity was definitely different than the small operating company. But the best thing that came out of that work is that it brought those 2 organizations much closer together again. And it created an understanding of how the small entity had been running, how they've been working, what some of their other operational challenges or successes were. And it led to review of and a different view on how some other things were organized, how other things were led. And it led to an evolution of the relationship more reflective of the current state of the business and the assets. And ultimately, it led to much easier and less contentious budget decisions and managerial decisions every year, with operating entity in California being able to get more autonomy because there was more similar and same language again. And the translation of assumptions and value in one context was easier brought back in into other organizations. The value of X, Y, or Z in organization A that's set up a certain way is not entirely the same as it is in organization B. And so if you make investment decisions differently, then you need to understand how to translate that so that you can make your own decisions. And that all became so much easier. So I feel like a relationship saved because somebody actually took time to understand from each other the nitty gritty of what was being talked about. The thing is, you can't catch everything, but if you are engaging in a new relationship critical to your business, you need to do the due diligence. I know that you're doing some. Almost none of us are doing enough or are doing it efficiently. As I said, we take some set amount of time or at some point cut off and say, this has to be enough. Let's do this with a bit more purpose behind it. Define your critical success factors, admit what you don't know. Go looking for the dirty laundry, strip out the bias, put a prenup in place. You can protect yourself from kind of 90% of the landmines out there, not from everything. But if you have that prenup, at least you stand a chance. If you're about to make a big hire, add a board member, sign a strategic partnership, or buy a business, and you want someone to help you see what's behind the curtain, that's what I do. So the only thing that's worse than a bad deal is a bad deal with no way out, or a bad deal that could have been prevented, right? So let's dig a little deeper, go after this stuff, and know what you get yourself into. Wishing you all many happy future relationships in your business. Call me if you could use some help. See you next week. That's it for this episode of the Business Emergency Room. If you are currently dealing with chaos or disruption in your business, please reach out. You can email, text, or call, and I will find a way to connect with you within 24 hours. I've helped others steer out of the storm, and I know I can help you too. Talk soon. Please like, subscribe, and share.